The alarm started the moment the cargo doors sealed. A shrill, pulsing wail echoed through the sterile corridors of the Interstellar Medical Frigate Virexus 9, prompting every available medical unit to scramble toward Docking Bay 2. Inside, a stretcher hovered 6 inches above the metallic floor, carrying a human unconscious, pale, limbs slack, and wrapped in a torn, soot-darkened flight suit that still reeked faintly of melting plastic and blood. Dr. Kirell, the lead xenophysician on Virexus 9, adjusted the translator coil around his neck as he strode beside the floating stretcher. His 4-fingered hands hovered anxiously above the human's chest, hesitant to touch. His assistants, 2 junior medics and a scanning operator, worked in silence. The human's name, according to the emergency transmission, was Vincent Orlan. Age, 38, species, Homo sapiens, occupation, interplanetary systems engineer, status, unknown trauma, possibly comatose. Start full-body scans, Kirell ordered, voice clipped. Thermal imaging, skeletal mapping, cardio-neural diagnostics, no assumptions. No vitals on surface read, muttered Yex, the scanning tech, his eyes fixed on the flickering display. Pulse sporadic, brain activity. Erratic. Vincent's head lolled sideways as the stretcher transitioned into a high-gravity stabilization chamber. His left leg was bent unnaturally, the ankle swollen and purple. A gash on his side had bled through the fabric, leaving a dark crust over his ribs. Kirell examined a jagged piece of shrapnel protruding just above the scapula. "Why do humans always crash during ion storms?" Kirell muttered, cutting away the cracked helmet with a sterilizing arc blade. "Maybe they enjoy it," said one of the junior medics, adjusting the Roman 4 inputs. "Unlikely," Kirell replied, "but I've seen stranger." The full scan concluded with a deep beep. "Fractured femur, fractured radius, minor cranial concussion," Yex listed. "Internal bleeding localized but not catastrophic, lung bruising, no spinal damage, neural activity fluctuating." "Not unresponsive, just inconsistent," Kirell hesitated. "Inconsistent how? Like he's dreaming." The alien doctor tilted his head. "Dreaming while unconscious from blunt trauma," Yex shrugged. "Humans are odd." Kirell turned back to Vincent. "Prepare for surgery. We'll need to stabilize the leg fracture and remove the shrapnel before any neurostimulation. Keep him under." As the medics prepared the tools, Kirell leaned over the human's face. The skin was clammy but flushed. There was a slight twitch in the right eyelid, then nothing. Kirell adjusted the biosensors and reached for the sedative injector, then Vincent's eyes snapped open. "Did someone call me?" he asked clearly. Kirell froze. The injector clattered to the floor. Vincent blinked, confused. "Where am I?" The medics exchanged glances, unsure whether to restrain him or flee. The man had gone from medically unresponsive to fully alert in seconds. "You're aboard Virexus 9, an interspecies medical vessel," Kirell said slowly. "You were brought in after a shuttle crash. You were unconscious, you are injured." Vincent looked down at his body. "Yeah, I feel that." He tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. "Don't move," Kirell said sharply. "You have a broken leg and arm and a piece of metal lodged near your shoulder blade." Vincent tilted his head. "So. Not a dream then?" "No." "Okay, that tracks." Kirell leaned closer. "Can you explain your sudden lucidity?" "Lucidity?" Vincent frowned. "You mean waking up? I heard someone say my name, thought it was my crewmate." "No one said your name," Kirell replied. "We were preparing for surgery." Vincent blinked again, slower this time. "Weird, felt real." Kirell gestured to Yex, who rechecked the neural readouts, still erratic but now coherent. "Your brain activity is normalizing. How long were you unconscious?" "I don't know. Last thing I remember is rerouting the power conduit during descent." Then bang, lights out. Kirell hesitated. "You should not be conscious at all. Your injuries are extensive." Vincent chuckled weakly. "That sounds about right." "Do not laugh," Kirell said firmly. "That could dislodge the shrapnel." Vincent immediately stopped. "Right, sorry." The medics began prepping the operating table. Vincent was sedated again, this time medically, and surgery proceeded without further surprises. The shrapnel was lodged near the supraspinatus muscle, but hadn't pierced lung tissue. The leg fracture required internal fixation with a carbon fiber rod, and the arm was stabilized with a cast. 3 hours later, Vincent was moved to the recovery bay. An oxygen mask covered half his face and wires ran from his chest to the monitor. Kirell watched him from the observation room. "He woke up because he thought someone called him," he muttered. "It's not the first time humans have done that," Yex said. "There are reports of humans regaining consciousness from comas after hearing familiar voices. But there were no familiar voices here," Yex shrugged. "Maybe the mind compensates?" "Fascinating," Kirell said. "Baffling, but fascinating." 2 days passed. Vincent remained conscious, though groggy. His leg was immobilized and he required assistance to sit upright. Kirell visited twice daily, asking questions he wasn't sure had answers. "Do humans often wake from trauma with no warning?" Kirell asked during one check-in. "Sometimes," Vincent replied. "Not always. I guess I heard something familiar." "You said you heard your crewmate," Vincent nodded. "Rafe. He was yelling my name, but he's not here, is he?" "No, your transmission didn't mention others." Vincent looked away. "He didn't make it." Kirell paused before answering. "Unconfirmed." No other life signs were detected at the crash site. Vincent closed his eyes for a long moment. "Got it." Kirell didn't press further. Over the next week, Vincent's condition stabilized. He was moved to a mobility chair and wheeled through the corridor for light therapy. His ribs still ached, and the cast on his arm made feeding himself difficult. "Can I ask something weird?" Vincent said one morning as Kirell checked his sutures. "You already have," Kirell replied. Vincent grinned faintly. "Why do you care so much, I mean?" "We're not from the same species." Kirell didn't answer immediately. He adjusted the bandage, then said, "Because you are alive, and you are interesting." "That your medical oath?" "No, that is curiosity," Vincent nodded. "Fair." On the 12th day, Vincent stood on his own for the first time. His leg trembled and he needed support, but it was progress. The medics watched with a mix of awe and concern. "You should still be bedridden," Kirell said flatly. "I've been in bed too long," Vincent replied, sweat beading on his forehead. "I'm not trying to run a marathon, just stand. Take care not to overexert. Healing is not linear." "I know." The following week, he shifted from the mobility chair to crutches. Each step was slow, deliberate. His arm remained immobilized, but his lungs had cleared and he could breathe deeply without pain. Kirell observed him from the hallway. Yex leaned in. "Still amazed he woke up like that." "He should not have," Kirell said. "But he did. What if his brain was never fully unconscious? Then our scans were wrong. Or his biology is more complex than we thought, possibly." Later that night, Kirell visited Vincent's room. The man was awake, reading a digital display with translated xenomedical journals. "Trying to understand what you did to me?" Kirell asked. "Trying to understand what you didn't," Vincent replied. "The meds helped, sure, but I think I was already on my way back. To consciousness, to myself." Kirell sat beside the bed. "What did you hear exactly?" Vincent looked up. "A voice, my name, just Vincent, like someone needed me." "And that woke you?" "I guess I wanted to be needed." Kirell considered that. "That is not a medical reason." "No," Vincent said. "But it's a human one." By day 27, Vincent was walking without crutches, though still favoring his right side. His arm cast was scheduled to come off in another week, and he'd regained 60% of his strength. Before discharge, Kirell ran a final scan. "Your bones are healing appropriately, no complications, but your neural activity remains curious." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Still inconsistent." "No, still human." Vincent grinned. "That's not a diagnosis." "It is now." As he boarded the transport shuttle back to Earth's orbital station, Vincent turned one last time to Kirell. "Thanks, Doc, for everything." Kirell nodded. He shifted slowly, testing the range of motion in his arm. The cast was gone, replaced by a flexible support brace that hissed faintly whenever he bent his elbow too far. The chair by the window creaked. "I know you're not sleeping," said Kirell, folding a translucent data pad across his lap. "Your breathing rhythm is all wrong for it." "I miss real windows," Vincent replied. "On Earth, they don't light up on a timer. You could request a habitat simulation. There's one that mimics Terran weather patterns." "Pre-ecological collapse, of course." "I'd rather not be lied to by scenery." Kirell didn't comment. He tilted the pad, eyes scanning the latest musculoskeletal readings. "You're compensating with your hip when you walk," he said. "Favoring the side is expected, but if it continues, your spine will rotate. That leads to more problems." "More problems I don't need," Vincent muttered. "Got it, I'll fix the gate." Kirell tapped a section of the scan. "Did you feel anything unusual when you got up earlier?" "Just the usual pain. Like gravel grinding behind my kneecap." "That's normal. The bone is healing, but the surrounding tissue is still inflamed." "I can recommend a pressure-moderated exosupport for a few days." "I'll take it," Vincent said without hesitation. "I'd like to walk without looking like I'm fighting gravity." "You are fighting gravity," Kirell pointed out. "This ship uses a slightly elevated pull to counteract muscular atrophy." "Right, forgot I'm heavier here." "Only by 8%, Vincent leaned forward, wincing slightly. "You know, back home, we just slap ice on it and hope for the best." "Inadequate," Kirell said flatly. "But disturbingly human." The door opened without warning, and a tall, violet-skinned technician wheeled in a narrow metal frame cradling a segmented suit. It looked like a cross between orthopedic gear and scaffolding. "This is the exosupport," Kirell explained as it was wheeled beside the bed. "It adjusts to your movement and applies counterpressure. It's not for speed, it's for alignment." "I wasn't planning on racing anyone," Vincent said, eyeing the device. The technician began fitting it around his leg, locking each joint with a hiss and magnetic click. Vincent flinched as the brace tightened around his thigh. "Too tight?" "No," Vincent said through gritted teeth. "Just nostalgic. I broke this leg once before. Took me 3 months to walk right." "That was under human care, I assume?" "Yeah, then I expect you'll do better this time." The technician handed Kirell a control fob before leaving without a word. "You can adjust torque here," Kirell said, pointing to a small dial. "Don't exceed level 3. Anything higher and you'll destabilize the joint." Vincent touched the dial cautiously. "So if I crank it, I'll faceplant, possibly into the wall." "Noted." He stood slowly, testing the brace with short experimental steps. The exosupport whirred softly, keeping his posture upright. It was awkward but less painful than expected. "I feel like a half-finished robot." "Your humor is improving. Pain meds must be working." Kirell watched him complete a circuit of the room. "You'll need to do this 3 times a day." "No skipping." "I'm not the type to skip rehab." "You're the first human I've met who didn't try to accelerate recovery by sheer willpower." Vincent paused. "I've tried that before. Ended up with a torn ligament and a lecture from a nurse who could bench press a shuttle engine." Kirell made a note on his pad. "You're adapting well considering the circumstances." "Yeah," Vincent said, "but I can't stop thinking about Rafe." Kirell didn't interrupt. The silence was invitation enough. "We were doing a systems check," Vincent went on. "He was outside the pod trying to reset a fried relay. I told him we should wait, but he said it'd be quick." He stopped walking. "I don't even know if he made it back inside before the second surge hit." Kirell set the pad aside. "There's a possibility he escaped on a separate pod. Not all crash signals are recoverable immediately." "Our range is limited. It's been weeks." "That doesn't mean he's gone," Vincent shook his head. "I can't stop hearing his voice even though it might not have been real." "Your auditory cortex processed something. It's unlikely to be an illusion." "Then what was it?" Kirell studied him. "Perhaps the part of your brain that needed to survive created what it needed to hear." Vincent sat down carefully. "You make it sound like instinct." "It is, but also memory. A fusion of what you know and what you hope." "I've never heard an alien talk this much like a philosopher." I'm a doctor with a curiosity problem. Vincent leaned back. So what now? I just do laps and hope the nightmare stops. No, Kirell said. You do laps, you recover. And if the nightmare remains, we address it with the same discipline we use for your leg. Vincent looked skeptical. You've got therapy modules for that? We have something better, Kirell said. A very patient researcher who finds your unpredictability professionally irritating. Vincent gave a half laugh. Glad to help. An hour later, he was back in bed, the brace leaning against the wall. Kirell remained, reviewing the sleep data from the previous night. You enter REM cycles inconsistently, he said, but your vitals remain stable. That suggests your dreams aren't disrupting basic function. They're not dreams, not really, it's more like echoes. Kirell tilted his head. Echoes of what? Sound, feeling. I keep hearing impact alarms, I smell ozone. Sometimes I wake up convinced I'm still inside the pod. Have you tried grounding techniques? Yeah, counting my fingers, naming objects, doesn't help much when you wake up thinking you're being crushed. Kirell considered this. Would you be open to neural desensitization protocols? That sounds invasive. It's not, just a series of simulations. They train the brain to separate memory from present stimulus. Do they work for humans? They've worked for species with similar limbic structures. Vincent sighed. All right, I'll try it. Tomorrow morning, Kirell said, after your walking session. Later that evening, a new technician entered shorter with a cluster of optic nodes around the temples. He carried a small tray of nutrient packets and set them beside the bed without comment. Do you all rotate shifts constantly? Vincent asked. Not constantly, the technician replied, but most of us prefer not to interact with the same patient too long. Why? Because humans confuse protocol. Vincent raised an eyebrow. How so? You ask questions. You challenge assumptions. You answer inquiries with metaphor. It makes data collection difficult. We call that conversation. It is inefficient. Inefficiency is part of the charm. The technician blinked. That is not an acceptable justification. Vincent opened one of the nutrient packets. It smelled vaguely of banana but had the texture of damp chalk. Do you have anything crunchy? No. Figures. After the technician left, Kirell returned with a small black case. This contains the interface for the desensitization protocol. I'll initiate it in the morning, but I want you to familiarize yourself with the sensory band tonight. He opened the case to reveal a thin circlet lined with microfilaments. Vincent picked it up. It was surprisingly light. How does it work? It reads your reactive patterns, not thoughts. Just how your body responds to stimuli. Then it introduces calibrated exposure to similar patterns in a controlled setting. So it tricks me into not panicking. It teaches you not to panic. Vincent set the circlet on the side table. Fine line. Most important lines are, by midnight the room was quiet, the ward lights had dimmed, leaving only the soft blue pulse of the monitor beside his bed. Vincent lay on his back, watching the ceiling again, the circlet untouched. He didn't sleep immediately. But when he didn't dream of alarms or voices. Just the sound of his own breath, steady and slow, like a tide easing back. Kirell, watching from the monitoring station down the hall, made a quiet note. Subject demonstrates decreased autonomic spikes. Possible shift in subconscious integration. Further testing required. He leaned back, unsure if this was healing or just humanity doing what it always did, adapting, even when it shouldn't be able to. The simulation chamber was colder than Vincent expected. He sat in the center of a softly lit dome, wearing the filament circlet across his temples. The floor beneath him adjusted minutely with each breath, as if the ship itself was monitoring his posture. Kirell stood beside a console embedded in the wall, his fingers dancing across a set of light-responsive glyphs. The chamber was silent, except for the faint hum of the neural sync initializing. This isn't going to make me relive the crash, is it? Vincent asked, tugging lightly at the circlet's edge. No, Kirell answered without looking up. That would be therapeutic malpractice. The protocol introduces elements from sensory fragments only. No full scenario replay. So what am I supposed to see? Lights, shapes, my third-grade math teacher? You may see nothing at all, Kirell said. The objective is to lower your baseline stress reaction to specific triggers detected during sleep analysis. Vincent exhaled through his nose. Right. So soft exposure. Correct. The system begins with low-intensity pulses. If your vitals remain within range, it increases complexity. Sounds like a very polite panic attack. We prefer the term controlled recalibration. The chamber lights dimmed and a low-frequency tone vibrated through the floor. Vincent's shoulders tensed, but he didn't move. At first, nothing happened. Then a barely audible hiss filled the air, followed by a static crackle that didn't quite resolve into anything recognizable. The sound shifted, echoing faintly behind his left ear, then disappeared. "Do you recognize that?" Kirell asked. "I think it's the coolant hiss from the pod's lower deck," Vincent said quietly. "Your pulse spiked, not drastically. Continue breathing." Another sound followed, more ambient, like the rattle of loose metal in a confined space. Vincent's fingers twitched involuntarily. "That one?" Kirell prompted. "Ceiling panel." "Rafe kicked it loose a week before the mission," Vincent said. "We never fixed it." "Log it," Kirell said to the console. A soft chime acknowledged the entry. The stimuli continued in sequence. A mechanical groan, a pressure seal cycling, the muted roar of distant thrusters throttling unevenly. With each new layer, Vincent's grip on the seat tightened, but he kept his breathing steady. Then came a sharp, rising tone, short, piercing, unmistakable. He flinched, not visibly, but his pupils contracted and his heart rate jumped. "That was the proximity alarm," Vincent muttered. "We heard it just before the storm hit." Kirell paused the sequence. "Would you like to stop?" "No," Vincent said, rubbing his palms on his thighs. "I can keep going. You don't need to prove anything. I'm already here. May as well finish the set." The tone resumed, softened now, as if filtered through layers of distance. The system began to lower the volume and blend the sound into a more ambient backdrop, less an alarm, more a signal, until it lost its sense of urgency altogether. Vincent sat still, jaw tight, but his vitals began to level out again. The display above Kirell's head showed a narrowing of the stress delta. "You're adapting," Kirell said. "It's not getting easier," Vincent replied. "I'm just getting used to being uncomfortable, which is the first step." Discomfort precedes control. After another few minutes, the system disengaged and the lights returned to baseline. The floor softened beneath his feet. "That's enough for today." Kirell deactivated the console. Vincent stood slowly. His knees didn't lock, but they argued with him the whole way up. Back in the corridor, the ambient lighting of the Virexus 9 felt unusually bright. Vincent adjusted his gait, the exosupport compensating without complaint. They passed a group of Sirelian interns, all pale-eyed and spindly, who parted in silence as they walked by. "You've become something of a curiosity," Kirell said once they were alone again. "Because I didn't fall apart." "No." "Because you did, and then you stood back up." They returned to the recovery wing. Vincent eased himself into the recliner beside the wall-mounted monitor and removed the brace. Kirell checked the calibration data. "You've exceeded our mobility projections by 4 days. That's the closest thing to a compliment I've gotten in here." Kirell didn't respond. He tapped through several menus, his face unreadable. "Something wrong?" Vincent asked. "The fusion point in your femur is nearly closed." "That's unexpected." "Bad unexpected?" "No, just unlikely. Human bones do not typically tolerate accelerated mineral density treatments well." Vincent reached for the water pouch on the stand. "Guess I'm a trend breaker, or you're stubborn to a fault." Vincent smiled faintly. "Both can be true." Later that cycle, as the corridor lights shifted to evening tones, Kirell returned carrying a slim, wrapped package. "What's that?" "A request you filed on your 3rd day here," Kirell said, handing it to him. "I found it in the requisition backlog." Vincent unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a folded stretch of black synthetic fabric, his old flight uniform, cleaned and restructured. The left sleeve had been reattached and the insignia patch stitched back into place. No tears. "No burns," Vincent said, running a hand over the collar. "I didn't think it was salvageable." "It wasn't," Kirell replied, "but the restoration team took it as a challenge." Vincent held it up. "Feels like cheating, it looks brand new. It's not meant to deceive. It's meant to remind you that not all damage is permanent." He folded the uniform and set it aside. "You always talk like this, only when I've run out of charts to explain the obvious." Vincent leaned back. "So what now?" "I walk better, sleep quieter, and wear a uniform that doesn't smell like smoke." "Am I fixed?" "No," Kirell said, "but you are functional, that's the foundation." "And Rafe," Kirell tapped a glyph on his pad. "I received a ping from a salvage vessel near the Murin Drift. They picked up a distressed boy with a human signature. There's a possibility." Vincent stared at the wall for a moment. "You said no false hope." "I said no assumptions. This is data, not hope." He nodded slowly. "Still feels like hope. If he is found, we'll notify you. If not, you continue." Vincent looked around the room, his brace, the circlet, the folded uniform, the empty nutrient packets. A recovery ward, but also a kind of monument. "You know," he said, standing up, "I don't think I ever asked why you volunteered for human patients." "You didn't. So why?" Kirell tilted his head. "Because your species does not follow patterns. You invent new ones. You do not heal predictably, but you do heal. Often in ways that defy standard models. That's one way of saying we're a mess. You are inefficient, disorganized, emotionally volatile, but also deeply persistent." Vincent chuckled. "Sounds like a backhanded compliment. It's the only kind I allow myself." The next morning, Vincent walked unassisted down the main corridor of the Virexus 9, the exosupport left behind as instructed. His stride was uneven but steady. At the docking bay, a transport waited, bound for the earthbound relay station. Kirell met him at the threshold. "You are cleared for departure." Vincent extended a hand. "Thanks, Doc." Kirell looked at the hand, then took it. "You're welcome, Vincent Orlan." He stepped onto the shuttle and took a seat by the window, watching the docking clamps retract. His reflection in the glass showed a face still marked by fatigue, but no longer hollow. As the shuttle pulled away from the frigate, Vincent leaned back and closed his eyes, not because he was tired, but because he finally could. And for the first time in weeks, he didn't hear a voice calling his name. He didn't need to.